Did we explain that we bring to the stage an object? Did?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we begin with that?
Absolutely. So do I start or do you start? Heads or tails? Or?
Oh, by the way, since we are at the Rubin, and since the Rubin is filled with deities and with also with the notion that we all are deities, I have made it so that my object that I bring to the stage is also a gift. Actually, more than a gift, an offering to the presiding deity of the day. In this case, it's a mask of my face.
That's
there you
wonderful.
go.
This is wonderful, actually. Do I get to wear it?
You could, but it's already an imposition for an artist to give his what he makes to someone, didn't ask for it, but it doesn't take a lot of space.
In theater, we do learn to work with masks. Of course, there's masks of all sorts, we learn to move and to find the energy of the character of the mask. So we have to study the mask very, very carefully. And then eventually we wear it.
This is, yes.
Should I?
Go for it, yes.
Sorry. Could go on and on.
Just when I was beginning to catch up.
Oh, you were going to catch up. This is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So, actually, it is an auto-portrait.
It's a self-portrait. It's also, in this case, a layered mask because it was made by casting my face. Then there is a layer which is quote, is a self-portrait by Gauguin. That I painted on cloth and
so that's why
applied to the mask,
ears to the
and
mask.
then I painted my face on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this could be an introduction to my first sort of provocation or question, which is, where do you stop when you start unmasking or masking? Do you ever stop?
Well, actually, I don't stop ever. I'm not somebody who looks back, and that might be a problem for certain artists because people feel they have to do retrospectives and they have to look into their past works to go forward. But I'm somebody who is interested by what is coming. So I'm not self-indulgent. I try to run in the middle of the night and go forward and try to find the light at the end of the tunnel. So that creates a lot of problems with the people I work, certainly in the theater, because it's a very, very insecure field of work. People want to know what they're performing, people want to know what their lines are going to be, people want to know how they're going to be dressed, and people want to know a lot of answers. And I usually do not have these answers. I like rushing forward and saying, well, let's go and find out, and let's discover. So I never, it's very surprising because sometimes we do production meetings or design meetings and I say, oh, well, I remember in a show doing this or doing that or designing this, and we go on the internet and we pull an image out and I go, oh, I've forgotten I'd done this. Oh, I also have done this. And it's very strange because I realize that I don't have any history of my own work. I'm actually more interested in losing myself and going forward, basically.
I apologize, but I'm a painter, so my mind doesn't work in a linear way from left to right, so now I'm going to begin from another direction, which is related to the fact that I'm going to be here 8 times with 8 different guests. And I thought it may be interesting to bring the guests in the same places every time, almost with the hope that at the end you will have some overtones of the conversation, something that no one predicted or said is going to linger up there. And because we're at the Rubin, I thought that the backbone of the conversation would be something called the seven limbs practice, which is the backbone of any Vajrayana Buddhist practice. And this practice can be described by using 7 different verbs for 7 different actions. And of course, when it's related to the Vajrayana, the predicate is something that has to do with the Buddhist, space. But in a way, we can turn it into almost to a society game where I bring in the verb, and you can say what that brings in for you.
Okay.
In the first step in the practice is taking refuge. So we can go back to the masking and unmasking. I mean, all of this, of course, I hope it is going to relate also to how you do what you do. That's basically what everyone always wants to know, but no one ever finds out somehow of any artist. So if the first action is the first verb that you encounter is taking refuge, and this relates also to your motivation. How would you describe your first impulse? How does it start?
Well, actually, I'm a very, very shy person, and I think that I try to, and certainly in the sense of taking refuge, and the theme of the mask is I try to hide. And it's a paradox because actually I express myself by hiding myself. Performers or storytellers in general are very, very, very shy people. But we always put ourselves in danger for some reason, by accident going back to my high school years, for example, I would have been the last person to step on stage. But there is something very comfortable in taking part in a play or any kind of group event because you could hide behind the people. So I started doing that and eventually started doing one-man shows, which is completely contrary to my nature. I'm actually a very, very, very shy person, and the last thing you want to do is to speak on a stage and defend alone your own content. So, but there's something, I don't know what it is an impulse that I cannot explain that always draws you to starting a new project where you think you will be hiding and disguising and where you will be not saying exactly who you are, and you will be using disguises, and even the character that you're going to play is going to be a character so remote from who you are and all that. And of course it ends up being who you are really, and that's really, your personality really comes out. And what it is that you have to say or convey in your own life comes out. And it's always torture, of course, to go through that process. But so with time, I kind of understood that it's a way of getting rid of that shyness and trying to understand myself through exposing it to an audience. And the audience tells you who you are. So
the masking is the
unmasking.
Technique to
exactly.
Unmask.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. Is that true of life also, or does it happen only in an artificially?
Well, in my case, it appears mainly in the forum of theater and improv theater or mask theater or physical theater, or of course there's many forms of theatrical expressions. But for me, that's where it happens. Because in real life, I'm a very, very discreet person. I'm somebody who has a very, very hidden personal life, and I'm not a big public figure. I don't do a lot of interviews. I agree to do some of these, but I'm very selective about who I want to have conversations with. But I'm not into that kind of exposure at all. I'm tempted to show you my own object. I'll tell you because in theater you need timing, and this would be a perfect timing actually. And I think you'll be a bit surprised how we've had the same intuition, or almost. I have to give you a context of where I found this, because it had to be a found object. In 2008, I come from a city called Quebec City in Canada, and we celebrated the 400th anniversary of the city. It's a very old city. And of course, everything in Quebec City was about exhibitions and showing the history of the city and bragging about the beauty of the city and all that. And of course, in 2009, everybody was sick of it. So everybody threw the garbage everywhere were full of beautiful things and objects that belonged to the year 2008. So, and one of these things actually is something that I found in a back alley, and I wonder why people would have thrown this away. I wasn't too sure what it was at start, but it is a kind of a mask itself, right? And it was in the bottom of a box, and I was wondering what it was, and it looks like some kind of a, if you put it like this, it is a kind of a mask.
I have to wear it.
Yeah, of course you have to wear it. There you go. So at first I thought it was actually a mask, a kind of commedia dell'arte mask, an Italian mask, like Francesco is. A mask with a long nose, which in Italy is as a liar, of course. But of course, as I studied the object closely, you'll see there's a little handle here, right, that deploys itself. So you can actually hold it. And at the bottom of the box was this little object here that you slide. So of course, the first time I slid it on, it was like this. I was wondering, I was going. So it's at the mustache of the mask, right? So it created like a little, and of course, it goes the other way around. And there's a little thing here, a screw to adjust it. And those are lenses. I don't know if you've noticed. You can't really see very well. So there's these little cards that came in the bottle. So they're pictures. So it's just a stereo. A very, very archaic way of stereoscopic.
And there's a picture of all of you right there.
But actually what they are pictures of these third centennial of Quebec City, the celebrations that they did in 1908. And they're actually, whoops, as you can see, I haven't used it a lot, but you insert the little card here, right? So it's the same picture taken twice, and you just adjust it until you have to cross your eyes, and eventually it has the characters. There you go. So at this level here, you could adjust it to your own eyes. You'll see a three-dimensional image.
Excuse us, but we're having fun up here.
So of course, there's a series of these images that you could always look at. And
perfect.
Yeah. But what intrigued me about this object is that it's something that dates from the late 1910s, early 1920s, and what fascinated me is that already at that time people were interested in entering images. That photography, of course, was now a common way of a common witness of our times, and that people were already playing with the form and trying to find ways to enter the images, and this is probably.
Well, this is very you in the sense of poetry and technology, and back to poetry and back to technology. I mean, this is technology.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the ancestor
of
what kids are wearing these days to do video games, and to eventually, we hope, will transfer into creating virtual realities and forms of art. And so it's.
I love the symmetry.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I was a bit surprised when you. This, of course, has more purity to it and more nobility.
Not really.
But yeah. So and the reason also why I thought it would be apropos to bring this to the conversation is because I'm concerned a lot about frames and framing. When you work in the theater, let's say you work in a proscenium arch system. Up until the end of the 19th century, the proscenium arch was pretty much vertical, and that had a lot to do with the relationship of man, his aspirations, the gods, the Deus ex machina that would come down and miraculously miraculously solve the problem, and the traps that where man falls into hell and his demons and all that. So the frame indicates that there's a vertical relationship with the central character. And then in the 20th century, the frame becomes like this because it's more horizontal. It's about film. It's about people it's about road movies. It's about people in their relationship with the landscape. And suddenly the notion of connections with the gods and with their devils is kind of evacuated from the story. And so I'm very, very interested in what the frame does and what the frame brings into the storytelling. And I'm concerned also of working in the circus that when there is no frame, what does that tell? You know, when you're not using any kind of way of framing the main character or the setting and I thought this was very appropriate because, of course, your work inspires this in the sense that there is this verticality to it. It seems to have remained and this connection with our aspirations and our falls.
You can look at this object as a cross also.
Mm-hmm.
So the verticality of a timeless perception mm-hmm. and the horizontality of mundane mm-hmm. narrative, mm-hmm. that is what I think about every day of the week.
But my question, Francesco, is how do you select your frames, in the sense that seeing some of your work upstairs, that there's things that are like this, and there are things that are like this. There are things that are small windows that we peek through, and there are things that are gangways that invite us into it. So is that accidental, or is that part of the discourse?
It's part of my nomadic stance to continuously rediscuss the ground that I'm standing on, both geographically and materially. Mm-hmm. In reality, I'm always like this. Even for large works, I'm always mm-hmm. hovering on top of the work. I've made enormous watercolors where I built a bridge and I was just sitting, mm-hmm. kneeling on top of the thing. My mind works differently if I'm looking ahead of me or if I'm looking down.
So in these large...
When I look down, there is more focus somehow. And then I don't have an answer in the sense everything I make is somehow, I find very difficult to extract it from the mind space where it comes from. I think mm-hmm. I'm extremely fortunate that I actually did get an audience, and that at the moment an audience connects emotionally with what I made, mm-hmm. it becomes an object and it becomes something that is not only in my head, because it would be difficult to have such a crowd of things inside my head only. So in a way it's accidental if something is a miniature or mm-hmm. a gigantic thing. I think they can be either one because they live in the mind first, mm-hmm. or at least not in the mind, maybe it's too vague, but in an emotional space. I have no academic training. Everything mm-hmm. I do comes from an emotional space. And I find my way through. If I don't have that emotional contact, I don't know which way to go, because I don't know what's good from another point of view.
Well, the sense of the discourse about frame for me is also about a door. When you open a door, the door is a human being, in the sense that it's made for a human being to go through. So that shape calls in the human body or the human presence. And I was struck earlier this morning seeing the excerpts from the Black Book that you've painted, which is pretty much about relationships, body relationship and sexual relationships and coupling, and how they're actually on pages of a book that have exactly the door shape, which invites the body. And I was wondering if it's accidental, intuitive, part of the inspiration.
Well, I think it must happen also in what you do, that you have a plan and you have listened to many voices and you bring together all these voices and then some extra voice comes out of nowhere and you go like, wait, what? That must happen in your
well, yes, of course. The thing about the way I devise pieces collectively is only based on intuition. So there are no rules, there are no recipes, and nobody knows. It's complete chaos when we start, and people are very, very, very fidgety, and I love chaos. I think that you cannot have order if you haven't created chaos first, and order will eventually help the chaos find its beauty and its position. But the only way to achieve that is through an intuitive process. And very often some participants, some actors or some designers say, it's so unintellectual. You know, when we work with you, we never discuss politics. We never discuss historical references. And we don't say, no, it's just intuition. And eventually it is political at the end, that you want. Everything is political and everything is eventually refers to something historical or societal. But it's only based on intuition, basically.
But when you say chaos, is that a negative quantity, or is chaos just a complex order, an order too complex to understand? What do you think?
For me, I see, chaos is the thing before beauty, right? So
good, I like that.
No, but it's because the contrary of chaos is cosmos, right? Cosmos, which is the Greek origin of order, the word order. So that means that the Greeks believed that the order of the universe was synonymous with beauty, because they call it cosmos. So that's why we have words like cosmetics. And you know, the idea, everything that we associate to beauty has to do with the idea of order. But before that, there is something called chaos. And if you start only with cosmos, you are copying somebody else's beauty, or you are using a recipe, or
you're stuck in the past.
But if you start with chaos, you have to find beauty within that. You have to find which is, of course, relates to some of the Lotus Sutra and a lot of some of the Buddhist teachings, which is the most beautiful things in creation grow in murky waters and in chaos, right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty much that same thing.
I like that. I always like the idea of panic, terror.
You're Italian.
The trumpets of Pan introducing, the epiphany of beauty.
Yeah.
I've always been going for that.
But it's also the idea of danger. There's panic, yes, and there's drama and there's all that, but there's danger. There has to be danger. I always say to the actors, well, because maybe some of you are not familiar with my work, but my work is devised and is written collectively. So we're not following somebody else's words, and we're not following anybody else's story. We're inventing our story as we're going along. And the only way you could actually produce something new and interesting and authentic is if you put yourself in danger. There has to be a real risk out there. And some performers abandon ship early. They want to know, am I playing the mother or not? we shall see. But what's interesting in this chaotic way of working very often is that let's say we're doing a play about something happens in a restaurant for some reason. So actors will take turns improvising a situation, and you would be playing the waiter, I'd be playing the client, somebody else would be playing the lover or whatever. And then we do the improv again, but then everybody changes, and eventually, by changing like that all the time, somebody hits what I call a bottomless pit, in the sense that an actual improv, and let's say he's playing the waiter, he feels very limited. What he has to contribute is very limited. But when he plays the father, he could improv forever. There's something, it's like a bottomless pit. There's something that you could just sit there and watch him, and it's forever. And then I go, this is in the show. You are doing this in the show for sure. Maybe not just that, but this is in the show. So I'm looking for bottomless pits.
It's like having a key and try all the different locks.
Yeah, and you try stuff, and sometimes people end up playing a taxi driver, and they weren't brought up in that world. They don't know taxi drivers, but there's something about that character that they know about more than anybody else in the group, and it's forever. They improv forever, and they create this character, and it's authentic.
But this is almost a technique that you devise to do it this way, or what?
Well, it's an observation. Is that with time
it's something you notice by doing it.
You trust that will happen. That everybody has a bottomless pit somewhere. It's an odd thing to say.
I definitely feel I have one. Just don't go there.
I think I found my bottomless pit.
But I very much like what you're saying, because also it shows that you don't have a sentimental notion of beauty. And this is very rare in our context of the world we live in, because beauty has been, like just any other thing, has been sentimentalized. So there's very few areas where you can actually look for knowledge, for things that are worth knowing. And beauty as a tool for knowledge is very much underestimated, I suppose.
We're in a world well, in the creative world, we're in a world of references, and we hang on to those references. And for example, when I work on film or in the cinema world and all that, people describe their projects or their ideas by referring to other films that already, which is fine, for a while. But there's a moment where you have to, and their sense of beauty, of course, is something that's already been masticated and swallowed, and that's scary. In the theater, I don't find that much, but in film worlds, there's always this joke. Well, what is your screenplay about? They say, well, it's a cross between. They say what it is. It's a cross between Carrie and Gone with the Wind. And you're supposed to, and they actually do that. The producers say, yeah, but what is it? And people do, and it's people have difficulties just explaining what it is that they're seeing and being authentic about their idea, and because it's a world of references. People need to see your idea before it's written, before it's shot, before it's edited. So people go on, and sometimes I've had film scripts, either for me as an actor or a director, being sent, and there's a kind of a synopsis, and then at the end of the synopsis is, well, a cross between this and that, and it gives you two, it's between a Wim Wenders film and a Godard film, and you go, okay, so now I have to put these two pairs of glasses, and I have to read the script as if it's a Godard film, at times a Wim Wenders film. So it's very it's strange, because people tint and they color what it is that they're trying to describe instead of just describing it.
But when you say, now, if I was to return to my script of Vajrayana statements...
That I keep slipping out
of? No, it's perfect.
That I keep running away from?
It's perfect. But the second action after taking refuge, we have taken refuge basically behind the mask, behind the mask. But then you've been talking about intuition. And the second verb on the Vajrayana sketch is offering. So to me, offering brings in intuition, in the sense, intuition, you receive that. Intuition is not something you actually generate. It's something you get.
Yeah.
How?
Well, The moment I started to trust intuition instead of intellectual debates and reason, is when I figured out that when we do a collective work, and let's say we want to do a piece about, we want to denounce some injustice, or we want to talk about war or something, the people sitting around the table suggesting ideas all come from different walks of life. Some of them come from a poor family, some from a rich family. They all have different educations. Everybody has a different experience of life, and they all throw their things there, and there's a huge debate that starts. And of course, nobody has the same opinions, and it becomes all about opinions. And if you want something to happen, you have to put a lot of water in your wine, because nothing's going to happen. You'll only be debating. So nobody's right, nobody's wrong, and it ends up creating something that is very bland and very, because everybody participating says, well, I'll agree to say that if you say that, and if you, well, I'm not sure we should be talking about this, because there's men and women, there's rich, poor, there's socialists and capitalists, lots of people sitting around the table, and so it ends up being one big compromise. So what I try to do is that I try to avoid themes and things like let's denounce this or let's do that, because that brings you into debate, intellectual debates and opinions. And I would say, why don't we do a show about a deck of cards? And people, well, what can we debate? You can't debate a deck of cards. If I take a deck of cards and I throw them in front of you and I say, what's your impression? And you say, well, I see a lot of red and a lot of black. I cannot debate that. I cannot be against that. I cannot say you're wrong. So I say, oh, that's interesting. So I can only take what you've said. Then I say, well, for me, a deck of cards is it's a lot of families. There's kings and queens, and there's probably kingdoms, and it's probably a story of 4 different kingdoms. You can't disagree with that. It's an impression I have. So if you work with people's dreams and impressions, and you're in the realm of intuition, and then the thing gets richer and richer and richer. If you're in the realm of debate, of opinions, of intellectual and themes and all that, if something comes out of that, it will be a watered-down version of your original idea.
So the formless, private lives define the form of the world outside, maybe.
Well, it's because you get to know an individual that you're working with through another channel, and not from what he's been taught, his education, where he comes from, what he's being told to think. You get to meet a co-creator through a completely different channel, which is a channel of impressions, emotions.
What he sees without knowing that he's seeing it, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And things also that are very incoherent, that will make sense eventually, but and people's dreams, you can't argue about some. I can't say your dream was wrong, So there was something interesting that we did for a while. In London, I worked on, I was in Germany, actually. We did something called Map of Dreams, and we just had this roll of paper that we'd unroll, and we have markers and stuff, and people would have 10 minutes to just draw their dreams, and then they would recount it. And they say, well, the reason why I did all these eyes is because I dreamt that there was my mother's eye, look at me, or whatever. And it was interesting because through the week we did that exercise, and eventually there was an actual map of dreams. People would always dream about ladders, forests. I mean, there was like all the cliches in the book, but people would dream about these things, and they would always say, well, this is where it goes, and this is where, and actually there was a map there. People tend to dream about more or less the same things, and they belong in a certain place. And so that got me very curious. And later on, when I worked on Midsummer Night's Dream in London, I said, well, let's do a map of dreams. A completely different group of people, different culture, working on a Shakespeare play. So we unrolled the paper, and more or less the same thing happened. Of course, it was different colors, maybe, and stuff. But there was a place, there was a map with roads and ladders everywhere, and the same animals, same things. And people would tend to position things in the same way.
This brings in I have a poem for you, which someone gave me a few days ago and made me think of you. It's very short. It says, between living and dreaming, there is a third thing. Guess it. What would you place there?
Between living
and dreaming. There is a third thing.
I said drinking. Maybe that's the problem.
It's done. It's done.
I had a lapsus linguae that betrayed.
It's done. No, but it made me think about this, what you are talking. I think you're talking about this, and I think you really are very concerned with this relation between mechanical life to the, to me, the interest for the mechanism. I don't see any break between the mechanism and the mechanism. It's all mechanical. Yeah. And so I think you're always looking, and it's so interesting that you talked about doors and windows, open these bottomless places, because I think you're always looking for windows everywhere. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. Well,
you're very aware of how mechanical everything is.
Yes, for sure.
This fits the Buddhist pattern, and you're looking for freedom, which also fits the Buddhist pattern. Well,
the thing that's interesting, and that I kind of discovered with time, and certainly working in the opera world, is that in the theater you're concerned about spacing and the sets and the actors. You sit for weeks with the actors debating what the subtext is, and you want them to, and it's all very, very kind of vague. When you work in the opera world, it's very clear. There's something called time. There's something called space. You're responsible of space. Everything that has to do with space, whether it's set design, the lighting, the way people move around, all of that. Costume is also part of space. The musical director, the maestro, is responsible of time. If you know that, and if you agree with that, you get along and you do a wonderful show. A lot of the problems in the opera world is that the two don't mind their own business. Of course, the maestro often says, I don't want that there, and I don't. And then, of course, it screws up your concept, and the other way around. You say, well, can't you cut this, or this is too long, or can't this be faster, or, So, but when you understand that we both have we're cooks, and we're a cook, we know what our place is in the kitchen, and you get along, that works. It's a wonderful thing. And what I find interesting is that when I work with opera singers compared to actors, is that the subtext is in the music. So you don't have to sit around for 2 weeks around a table saying, well, I think Tennessee William actually meant that Blanche at that moment. And people say, no, that's all right. You don't disagree. It's in the music. The music tells the performer, this is the abstract impression of what at that moment she means when she sings this word. So you agree. It's all about agreement and about reminding the performers that that's what it's about. So the music is there for that, which I think is absolutely wonderful. And you need to create a space that's extremely hard and logical for that kind of how time is. Time is it dilates itself. Time on the stage. It's something in the music. It swells, and it's an odd thing. And I mean, we don't have time now, but when I do tests sometimes where I say to people, okay, I have a stopwatch, and I say, what is a minute? And when you think a minute has gone by, put your hand up. And you'd be surprised. There's people who wait for 2 minutes before they go like this. There's people who are on the nose. There are people after 40 seconds go. Everybody has a concept of what time is when they're not looking at a watch. So time is a kind of an elastic thing, and it has to breathe. And that's what I've discovered working in the opera that I was missing in the theater, is that idea of that your job is to create something extremely hard and mechanical and programmed and sure for this kind of odd thing, elastic, which is time, emotion, impression, which is kind of an odd thing that dances around. goes through the machine and comes out, and so, my God, it became so. Maybe it's the mask thing that made me want to mime it.
The next word in the Vajrayana society game is regret, which means how important is, the mud on which the lotus grows, how important that is, how present that is. I think you have told us you're very reserved about your life and you'd rather talk about your work, which is acceptable. But what's the relation between life and work? How much darkness do you need to work well?
Okay. Well,
or you don't need?
Well, it depends. In the case, what's interesting about theater is the sport of memory, right? The first compliment you get.
Did you make that up? Or
No.
What?
Well, yes, I made that up, but I'm sure I didn't invent it. But I think it's because I think performance is a sport. Performing arts it's a very, very sporty thing to do, and it's the first sport is the sport of memory, and the first compliment you get when the first play you're in. You have some aunt who comes up to you or some uncle who says, my God, you have such a great memory. How do you remember all those lines? Before they say you were a great Hamlet or you were a great Juliet. So that means that's what, we kind of brushed them off and say she didn't understand anything and she's a peasant or whatever. But she's right. It's what it's about. It's about remembering. So the art of theater is about remembering. And it's in every sense of the word. So your memory is what decides, and regret is connected to that, because memory is what you need to remember, you remember. What you don't need to remember, it's gone. So you can't spend a life keep regretting certain things. So there's a moment where you have a mechanism that says, okay, you don't need to suffer this anymore, and it kind of lets it go. But there's things where you still need to. So that's why for me regret is connected to this idea of memory. You have to, certainly in the theater, you have to reopen scars. When the natural thing in real life is that the scar is healing, and normally it's left there as something that you've accumulated, it's part of your life, it's a trace of something you've suffered, of a wound or whatever, and it's fine. Actors or writers or artists in general reopen that. And that's what and they say, remember that. Remember what so that you could actually give your emotion or your pain or your joy or whatever it is that you're remembering to the character that you're playing. So that's why it's a tricky thing, memory in the theater, because it's so intimately connected, and it's based on the idea of memory, and it's also about remembering who we were. We keep remounting plays not just because they're good plays and they sell tickets. We remount plays because they're who we were, or how we thought. This is how we thought in those days, and see how we don't think that way anymore, whatever. So it's about not forgetting.
I go home happy. This expression, theater is the sport of memory. So beautiful. Yes. I'm always very weepy, and this brought me tears.
Yeah. No, but I think it's also the.
It's exact.
It's because it's an ephemeral performance. What attracts me more to that than a recorded form of expression is that it's about ephemeral. Whatever happens here today amongst us, the people here are the only witnesses, and it's very ephemeral. It's very, very ephemeral. And there's this wonderful thing. I don't know if you've heard of the snowman built by Michelangelo. There's this. It doesn't snow a lot in Florence, as you know, but it happens occasionally. And some Medici ordered Michelangelo, this is interesting material, you could actually create something with that. And of course he was there and he had assistants and all that, and he took the snow and created supposedly the most beautiful man made of snow that lasted for about an hour and a half. and disappeared.
It's the most beautiful because, as Wallace Stevens said, a memory imagined is always more seductive
Exactly, and that's theater.
Than a melody
That's exactly
heard.
theater. You had to be there to see it. So, was it really that good? Who cares? It's the memory of it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing about the Michelangelo snowman. Is it true or not? We don't know. Is it just a kind of an urban legend from the Italian Renaissance? We don't know. Was it really that beautiful? We're not sure. But it doesn't matter. It's what people have made, the memory that was built from that thing that we needed to happen, I think.
This is good. On the schedule next is Rejoice, which could bring us on another type of questions about where it ends. I mean, it seems you like to keep the work in an extremely fluid state. Do you ever finish anything, or do you ever?
No.
Not really, right?
No, it's always odd because in the theater in general, a play is the proof that it's done, right? Published play. I rarely publish, very, very rarely publish my work, and when I do, it's just a trace of a witness of where we were at that point on that date. But my work is always a work in progress. It's not a game that I play, it's just the way it is. For me, the writing process really starts when the audience is there and the audience informs you on what you're doing, and then you answer back, and eventually every night you resculpt the thing and you make it more efficient and you make it clearer and deeper, and eventually, after, let's say, 4 or 5 years of touring, we stop it. But it doesn't mean it's finished. So when we remount it, it's an opportunity to rewrite it, but really rewrite it. And of course, it's a very it's not very wise economically because you can't sell plays. You can't sell, and actually, that's one of the odd things about the performing arts, whether it's music, dance, or theater, or even opera, for that matter, is that the moment people invent ways to transcribe, then this becomes more important than the actual thing. And I remember when I was working on The Ring here at the Met. Some evenings, there were people in the room who had the score on their lap. I mean, I'm not inventing this. They come with the score, and they like that, and then they hear something crack on stage, or there's something that squeaks or whatever, because there's the set or whatever, or the actor stumbled or whatever, and they go. And you just want to say, buy the CD. Listen to it on radio. Do not go through it. They're expensive tickets. Why don't you just? Yes, it's music, but it's in the meat grinder of a production and people and spontaneity and things that happen or whatever. So people are very, very, very obsessed with this thing of it's not like he intended. It's not that. Maybe not. And maybe it wasn't like that at all. It's just, it was noted down. So it's the same thing for plays and same thing for a lot of the great choreographies that are being remounted constantly at Opéra de Paris or places like that, or at the Royal Ballet. I'm not against repertoire, not at all, but we're in a time and age right now where playwrights publish their plays before they've been produced. So you say, fine, but it means the play's not been put, the meat grinder of being
heard,
said, eaten, consumed, tested. So that takes a lot of place now in the culture of performing arts, the actual pictures of the productions, the scores, the text, and all that. Yeah, but what about the event? What happened? What was invented that night? What did we witness that was happening for the first time in front of our eyes?
So that's where you rejoice when the moment
Absolutely.
pops up.
Yeah. There's something,
It's not in some final achievement. It's in the moment when that manifests.
To a certain extent. I mean, what is the definition of a good actor? What's acting? Acting is you take somebody's script and the audience, you reenact it in a way that people think you're actually inventing this. You're actually writing it. Right? A good actor makes you believe that this is not Shakespeare or Molière, or it's that he's actually saying it, he's actually inventing it in front of you, right? That's good acting. So what I say is that, yes, there's that, but there's also, why don't you invent it for real? You know, what if you were really inventing? So we agree on we have a canvas. We say, okay, well, say this more or less, and talk about that. Make sure you include that information, and people come on stage and they invent it for real. So there's something that's being invented there that people are thirsty for. They're hungry for that. They want that. They're excited. They're challenged when they see that. So it might not be perfect writing. It might not be polished writing. But it is writing. Time for another impression.
No, it's good to be quiet for a moment. Asking for guidance, but I think you have answered that. You look for guidance everywhere, really, or don't you? Or is there a lineage? But what are your gurus? What are your
obviously your connection with India was, of course, very, very, very strong, and probably redefined how you saw art and life. And my big shock was my connection with Japan. I spent a lot of time in Japan, and of course I got to see all the great kabuki masters, and so I was very, very much influenced by Japanese theater. But it would be too lengthy to really get into all of that process, because it was a very, very complex series of events that had a great influence on my work. But in a more general way, when I had to learn Japanese, and certainly I'm better at reading it than speaking it, but I could read pretty good Japanese now, and I was working in Tokyo a lot, in Kyoto, and part of the Japanese language is Chinese characters, as you know. So, and it struck me that even in the way that I had to learn all those kanjis, and for example, the word for tree. The way we would draw a tree is that we do a trunk, and we do the branches, right? So that's how in the West we do the tree. In China and in Japan, it's a line, and it goes. There's something that marks that it's the ground. There's a line, and then there's the roots. So the perception that part of the Asian culture has of a tree is that what's above and what's under is as important, takes as much place in the picture. And that really kind of struck me. And there's a lot of things like that that I've experienced by learning either Chinese or Japanese. And what it informs me of is that if you cut the roots, you get a smaller tree, like the bonsais and all that. So that means that if you're an avant-garde artist and you want to, be perceived as somebody who's ahead of the curve, and you're always going around, you have to be connected way in the back. There has to be something that you're connected to in the past. Yeah, something has to be connected to in the tradition, in the ancestry of things. So that's what I thought was so well balanced in the Japanese, even in the contemporary video game culture of Japan. There is always this sense that it's extremely avant-garde, futuristic. It's very, very far ahead, but it's connected to something that goes way, you know, way, 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 way back. And coming from a society like Canada, for example, Canada is it's going to be 150 years old, and it's not a very old country. It's a very young society that doesn't have a lot of. So we invent this thing. We call it France and England, and you know we go in. But before these guys, there was the Aboriginal culture in Canada, and so I'm trying to see how I can find that in my own culture, in my own country, that how I can go forward and continue to be interested by what's coming up, but being connected to something that's the roots of all this, what was there before me. And so that's, for me, I don't know if it answers the question of guidance, but this idea of that you cannot invent if you haven't, if you're not rooted.
There is a wonderful quote by Henry Michaud, who wrote about Chinese ideogram. Mm-hmm. He says, "I'm only interested in what's very new or very old." Uh-huh. Yeah. And we were talking about this earlier, how in Chinese culture there is this strange collusion between the persistence of the culture and the destruction of the culture. Yeah. Do we have time to? Are we going on? Are we okay? Last but not least on my Vajrayana tenets is, and this is the one moment which can be tricky, because you ask in this, you know, set of steps, you ask for guidance until final enlightenment. So you affirm that there is such a thing as a condition of no more learning, of complete knowledge. Yeah. Do you have any interest in this kind of things?
Well,
I mean, do you think you experience that from time to time? Is that a source of creativity to sit somewhere and say, okay, I got it?
Well, I don't. I'm too humble to say that. I don't have the pretension of saying I've got it. What I know that I've touched on.
The attempt here is to talk about these things without offending anyone,
of course,
without creating a division where you have it and someone else doesn't. That's not what we do.
There's one thing that I believe in, and I don't know if it's based scientifically or whatever, but I believe that there's channels and other dimensions, and I believe in all that in the sense that if what you do is good and well-informed, and if you followed your intuitions and everything's right and at the right moment, something miraculous happens. There's a miracle that happens that is way beyond your control. But you're the artisan that has put all the things there, and suddenly something happens, and something from another world manifests itself. That I believe, because it happens to me regularly. I'm not a medium, and I don't have the pretension to, it happens by chance and way beyond my control. But there are things where, when things are right, when the audience wants it to happen, for example, I did a show called the Dragon's Trilogy, which was all about the relationship of China and Canada and immigrants and all that. And at the very end, there's a character that was leaving for Hong Kong, going back to his native land, and it was in Montreal, close to the St. Lawrence River, and we had a pier, and it was in a hangar where there's a huge door that would open at the end, and there would be 9 barrels of fire to try to blur the new condos being built across the river. And you had this character, this British character who was born in Hong Kong during the colonies, and who was going back into this kind of mythical vision of Hong Kong that he had. And the door opened, and this Chinese junk came into the frame on the river, and it lasted the time that, and then after the door went down. And of course we almost died of it. We were all pinching ourselves. And nobody believed us that this wasn't a guy with a walkie-talkie saying, okay, cue, and all that. It just happened. And the Dragon's Trilogy it was three dragons. It was about the green dragon, the white dragon, and the red dragon. The red, the white, and the green. And there were 3 sails on the junk, and one was green, one was white, one was red.
My God.
And of course, we spent the whole day after that trying to find that junk, that had it appeared from some other dimension. And finally, on the river later that night, there was a big fireworks festival, a competition, and this junk supposedly was there every Wednesday night, serving dinner, and depending on the country that was presenting, and it was Italy. So that's why they had nothing to do with it. And so this is one example. Okay, and these things happen, and they don't happen. I don't make these things happen. It's just that everything was right, and there was a moment where all of those doors of perception, or whatever you call them, just kind of aligned, and this thing came and appeared in front of our face. And we went, okay. So I think that good art and good artists are conjurers. And as I say, I don't believe in, well, I can't say I don't believe in ghosts because I have a very long ghost story that happened here in New York City, but that's another story. But whatever it was, if it was a ghost or not, but I do believe that there is, and certainly now with new scientific theories like string theory and all that, there is place for ghosts and all these things now. So we're not completely, zonked.
Ending where I started last time with Patty, the first question I had to ask her, do you talk to the dead? And she was like, of course.
No, but that's, so that's addictive. And there are moments of enlightenment, there are moments of their epiphanies. And sometimes they arrive early in a project, sometimes they arrive after 5 years of touring. I don't care. They happen when you don't ask for them to happen, and they're incredible. They're beyond coincidences.
And they confirm that you're being correct in your...
Yeah, that there's something that we were all had our antennas on at the right moment and then that happened.
Almost done. The last word is dedication, which brings in, does one does it for yourself or for another or for what? Why does one do it?
Well, I think that good entertainment is generous entertainment. I really enjoy other people's plays and other people's work or artwork when I feel it's generous, when there's generosity there. And generosity is not just dedicating yourself on stage and trying to give the best performance every night. Or it's beyond. It's a mentality. It's a way of perceiving. For example, the whole actor's studio mentality is find the emotion and you share the emotion with your. And it's all happening there, and the audience is sitting there and they're seeing people who are so emotional, and they go, "That looks fun." But they don't get any emotion. But they go, he's good. Look how it's incredible. Look how hard it's probably. Great actor, great actor. You come out of there empty, alienated. But whatever you do on stage, if the emotion is there, that for me is the thing. That's generosity. That's dedication. The emotion is in the room, and you could be cold as ice on stage. But if it is that you're conveying, if it's well done and all of that, triggers emotion in the audience, then and I think that in general, this notion is misunderstood. The emotion remains on the stage, and you feel sometimes that things are happening, and the actor kind of goes almost, sorry, we're doing our job here. Don't react. This is kind of thing. And what struck me when I went to Japan the very first time is how it's exactly the contrary. How in the kabuki, the actor has this very, very hard, emotional, gut-wrenching moment to do towards the end of the play. And there's a long silence, and he's waiting for the audience to scream at him. And they scream his actor's family name. Not his name, but the
lineage.
Katarazuka. And then he's sitting there, and he needs it, and he takes it, and then he continues and does his lines, and then people scream at him and all that, which is you are worthy of this family.
In my hometown, they shoot at the actor. I'm not kidding.
Well, it's one type of audience participation.
From Naples. It's a very problematic city.
Yeah. So you see, that's what I mean. That this thing of not ignoring your audience, not ignoring to who you're in dialogue with, and on the contrary, having good sex, and not just kind of doing this thing and going out in trance because I was so moved and going, well, good for you. We paid the ticket and we didn't get to taste anything. We didn't get to.